In this video, we will explore all the prisoners on death row executed in the United States in May 2025, including their last words and meals. Welcome to Inmate Execution Records, where we bring to you all the information of inmates in the United States daily. Subscribe now to be updated and be part of this channel. On May 1st, 2025, the state of Florida executed 62-year-old Jeffrey Hutchinson, a former U.S. Army Ranger, for the 1998 shotgun murders of his girlfriend, Renee Flaherty, and her 3 children, 9-year-old Jeffrey, 7-year-old Amanda, and 4-year-old Logan. The execution, carried out by lethal injection at Florida State Prison near Stark, marked Florida's 4th use of the death penalty that year, a reflection of the state's accelerating pace under Governor Ron DeSantis. The tragedy unfolded on a night in Crestview, Florida, after a domestic dispute. Hutchinson, who had served 8 years in the Army, including deployments during the Gulf War, packed his belongings and firearms into a truck, visited a local bar, and later returned to the family home. A 911 call later traced to Hutchinson, chillingly reported, "I just shot my family." Police found Hutchinson in the garage, the murder weapon on the kitchen counter, and gunshot residue on his hands. At trial, Hutchinson claimed 2 unidentified assailants committed the killings as part of a government conspiracy to silence his activism on Gulf War veterans' health issues. Jurors rejected this defense, convicting him of 4 counts of first-degree murder. He received life in prison for Renee's death and 3 death sentences for the children. Over 2 decades of appeals followed, with Hutchinson's lawyers arguing that Gulf War illness, PTSD, and paranoia rendered him mentally incompetent. A judge dismissed these claims weeks before the execution, stating Hutchinson understood the punishment's rationale. On the day of his execution, Hutchinson chose a final meal of grilled salmon, mahi-mahi, asparagus, a baked potato, and iced tea, a stark contrast to the violence that defined his final years. At 8 p.m., the lethal injection process began. Witnesses reported Hutchinson mumbling silently as the drugs took effect, his legs shaking briefly before he fell still. By 8:15 p.m., he was pronounced dead. Florida's execution protocol employs a 3-drug cocktail, a sedative, etomidate, a paralytic, rocuronium bromide, and potassium acetate to stop the heart. The state shields the identities of execution participants and drug suppliers under secrecy statutes, a policy reinforced in 2022 to limit public scrutiny. Critics argue such opacity hampers accountability, particularly amid debates over execution efficacy and ethics. For the victim's family, closure remained elusive. "Not a day goes by that we don't think about the loved ones taken from us," Johnson said after the execution. Yet, the prolonged legal process, 27 years between crime and punishment, drew public criticism. One social media commenter lamented, "He lived 27 years longer than they got to." Following that, on May 15, 2025, at 6:16 p.m., the state of Florida extinguished the life of Glenn Edward Rogers, a man who haunted America's consciousness for 3 decades, a convicted killer, a suspected serial murderer, and, in his final moments, a political provocateur. This is the story of his last day, a day where justice, trauma, and unanswered questions collided in a sterile room at Florida State Prison. Glenn Rogers, 62, was no ordinary inmate. Dubbed the Casanova Killer for his charm and the cross-country killer for his trail of bloodshed, he confessed to 70 murders, though only 2 convictions sealed his fate. Tina Marie Cribbs, a 34-year-old mother of two, met him at a Florida bar in 1995. Days later, she lay lifeless in a motel bathtub, stabbed with brutality that left jurors trembling. Her DNA stained his clothes. Her stolen car became his getaway vehicle. But Roger's violence stretched beyond Florida. Sandra Gallagher, a California mother of three, met a similar end weeks earlier. Both women, petite and red-haired, fit his macabre type. Roger's final day began at 3:45 a.m. He awoke to the hum of fluorescent lights, his last sunrise reduced to a countdown. For breakfast, he chose simplicity: pizza, chocolate cake, and soda, a stark contrast to the decadent lies he once fed his victims. His wife visited, separated by glass, their final goodbye devoid of touch. "I love you," he whispered, a phrase that echoed hollowly for families who'd never hear their loved one speak again. Outside, demonstrators clashed. "God loves even killers," cried one. "An eye for an eye," retorted another. The debate raged. Was this closure or state-sanctioned revenge? Floridians for alternatives to the death penalty condemned the timing. Governor DeSantis, fresh from a White House event, had delayed the execution. Politics, they argued, had no place in death. At 6 p.m., the curtain rose. Rogers, gaunt and gray-bearded, blinked rapidly under the glare of execution lights. Leather straps pinned his arms, a cruel irony for a man who once wielded knives with impunity. The lethal cocktail flowed. First a sedative, then a paralytic, finally a heart-stopping poison. His chest heaved once, twice, then stillness. A prison guard shook him, shouting his name. No response. At 6:16 p.m., the state declared justice served. His last words was a cryptic mix of defiance and loyalty. "In the near future, your questions will be answered," he vowed to victims' families, a taunt from the grave. Then, a nod to power. "President Trump, keep making America great. I'm ready to go." Political theater? A final jab at a divided nation? Or the ramblings of a man desperate for relevance? The answer died with him. Tina's mother, Mary Dick, once said, "My life stopped in 1995. For 30 years, she waited. Sandra's children grew up motherless. Yet as Roger's heart ceased, a son of Andy Sutton, another suspected victim, declared, "The nightmare's over." Closure? Perhaps. But in the silence after the syringe emptied, one question lingered. Does death heal or merely deepen a wound? For every justice served cheer. But here's the question. Can a state condemn murder by committing it? Moving forward, on May 20th, 2025, at 12:46 a.m., the state of Indiana extinguished a life it deemed beyond redemption. Benjamin Donnie Ritchie, 45, was executed for the murder of Officer William Toney, a crime committed 25 years ago. But who was Benjamin Ritchie? A cold-blooded cop killer? A damaged man shaped by tragedy? Or both? Tonight, we unravel the final chapter of a story steeped in pain, regret, and the enduring debate over justice in America. September 29, 2000. A stolen van. A foot chase. For gunshots. Officer Bill Toney, a 31-year-old father of two, fell to the ground, his bulletproof vest no match for the fatal shot above its edge. The shooter, 20-year-old Benjamin Ritchie, a troubled young man already on probation for burglary. In that moment, two families were shattered. one grieving a hero, the other bound a son they'd soon disown. At trial, Richie smirked. He laughed as the verdict was read. To Officer Tony's widow, D.D. Horn, it was a slap in the face. That punk kid, she called him. But what the jury didn't hear, what his lawyers failed to present, was the story of a boy abandoned before he could walk. A child whose mother drank and drugged through her pregnancy, leaving him with fetal alcohol syndrome, lead poisoning, and a brain forever trapped in turmoil. For 23 years, Richie sat on death row. In that time, he claimed remorse. "I've ruined my life and others," he told the parole board, his voice trembling. "You can't take back what you did." Yet the state of Indiana disagreed. Governor Mike Braun denied clemency. The courts refused to intervene. And as the clock ticked toward midnight, Richie's final meal arrived. Olive Garden tour of Italy, a last taste of freedom, or perhaps a cruel parody of it. 1 a.m. lethal injection begins. His attorney, Steve Schutte, watches as Richie twitches, his left arm clenching, feet jerking uncontrollably. A foolish, senseless waste, Schutte later called it. The man executed tonight wasn't the same person who pulled that trigger. But outside the prison walls, crowds gathered. Some held candles for Tony. Others shouted for mercy. Father Richard Holy's words hung heavy. "Must we take a life to avenge a life?" His final words? "I love my family, my friends, and all the support I've gotten. I hope they all find peace." Peace, a word that eluded him in life, a word that now haunts the legacy of his death. The Fraternal Order of Police hailed this as Genesis 9, verse 6 fulfilled. "Whoever sheds man's blood, by man his blood shall be shed." But what of the man who never stood a chance? The child born into addiction, abandoned twice before his 3rd birthday? In 5 days' time, the clock ticks mercilessly toward 6:53 p.m. on May 20th, 2025, a moment frozen in time for two families bound by tragedy. 13 years to the day after 76-year-old Nancy Harris breathed her last, her killer, Matthew Lee Johnson, would take his final breath in the same state that condemned him. This is a story of fire, forgiveness, and the irreversible cost of a single, horrifying choice. May 20th, 2012. A quiet Sunday morning in Garland, Texas. Nancy Harris, a grandmother of 11 and great-grandmother of 7, unlocked the doors of the store she'd worked at for over a decade. She lived just steps away, a pillar of her community. But within hours, her life would end in unimaginable agony. Matthew Johnson, a 49-year-old father battling drug addiction, entered that store with a bottle of lighter fluid and a lighter. Surveillance footage shows the unthinkable. Johnson dousing Harris in fluid, demanding cash, then igniting her body. As flames engulfed her, she stumbled outside, screaming for help. A police officer extinguished the fire, but the damage was done. 3rd-degree burns scorched 60% of her body. 4 or 5 excruciating days. She clung to life before succumbing to pain even morphine couldn't dull. At trial, Johnson confessed, "I hurt an innocent woman. I took a human being's life." He choked out. His defense argued addiction and childhood trauma clouded his judgment. Prosecutors painted him as a repeat offender, a future danger. The jury agreed. In 2013, he was sentenced to die. But justice in death penalty cases is never swift. For 12 years, appeals wound through courts, all denied. Even a last-ditch plea to the U.S. Supreme Court, arguing bias in his sentencing, fell on deaf ears. The state of Texas would have its reckoning. In his final hours, Johnson ate what every inmate ate that day, a nondescript prison meal. Gone are the days of Last Suppers in Texas, a tradition abolished in 2011 after a white supremacist requested a feast and left it untouched. For Johnson, no symbolic steak or pie, just the cold reality of a system that had stripped him of mercy bite by bite. Yet in his final statement, Johnson sought not defiance, but redemption. To Harris's family, he pleaded, "As I look at each one of you, I can see her on that day. I just please ask for y'all's forgiveness. I never meant to hurt her." To his own daughters, he whispered, "Forgive me for walking away. My choices were my own." And in a moment of raw vulnerability, he prayed to see Nancy Harris first in the afterlife, to spend eternity making amends. 6 members of Nancy's family watched as the lethal injection flowed. No tears, no outbursts, just the hollow silence of a wound that never heals. "Days get easier," her daughter-in-law once said, "but there's no day where it's totally healed." For them, closure is a myth. Only absence remains. At 6:53 p.m., Johnson's body stilled. 13 years to the minute after Nancy's death, the scales of justice, as Texas sees them, were balanced. Matthew Johnson's name now joins a grim roster. The 595th person executed by Texas since 1982, a state that prides itself on holding vicious criminals responsible, as Attorney General Ken Paxton declared. Yet lingering questions burn. Does death heal, or does it simply fan the flames of humanity's darkest contradictions? In the end, 2 families are left in the ashes. One mourning a life stolen, the other a life squandered, and a society left to ask, when we extinguish a monster, do we risk extinguishing our own humanity? Time is a merciless warden. For Oscar Smith, it had ticked away 35 years, 12,775 days, on death row. But on May 22nd, 2025, the clock finally stopped. This is the story of his final hours, a last meal, last words, and the last breath of a man who swore he was innocent until the end. October 1st, 1989. A 911 call from a Nashville home captured the screams of a 16-year-old boy. "Frank, no, God, help me." Before silence fell. By dawn, Judith Smith and her 2 teenage sons lay dead. Judith shot and stabbed, Chad with a bullet through his eye, Jason's throat slashed. The name Frank would haunt the case. Franklin, Oscar's middle name, the name he went by. Prosecutors said it was a final plea of a boy begging his stepfather for mercy. Oscar Smith, a machinist with 2 missing fingers, was arrested weeks later. The evidence? A bloody handprint on a bedsheet, insurance policies on all 3 victims, and co-workers who testified he'd threatened Judith a dozen times. "I'll kill her and those boys." The jury took just hours to sentence him to death. But Oscar never stopped claiming innocence. In 2022, new DNA tests found an unknown person's genetic material on the murder weapon, and all. Yet the courts refused to reopen the case. "The evidence is overwhelming," the judge wrote. "For Oscar, the truth died with him." Death row's last meals are a cruel paradox, a feast before famine, a taste of freedom before the needle. Oscar's final request was simple: hot dogs crispy tater tots, and apple pie a la mode, the same meal he'd ordered in 2022 when the governor halted his execution just hours before. This time, there will be no reprieve. Some say last meals are about comfort. For Oscar, it may have been nostalgia, the Waffle House where he met Judith, the family dinners before the divorce, the twins they shared, now grown without him. Or perhaps it was defiance, a man choosing one last thing for himself before the state took everything. The last 2 weeks were spent in solitary confinement, a cell smaller than a parking space. His only visitors? A spiritual advisor singing, "I'll Fly Away," and attorneys fighting a doomed lawsuit. Tennessee's new lethal injection protocol, a single drug, pentobarbital, was untested. His lawyer warned it could feel like waterboarding, a torturous drowning. The state didn't listen. In his final letter, Oscar wrote to a friend, "I hope you know you are loved." Did he mean it as a farewell, or a plea to be remembered as more than a killer? 10:32 a.m. The curtain lifted. Oscar, now 75, looked at the witnesses and spoke for 3 defiant minutes. Somebody needs to tell the governor the justice system doesn't work. Too many innocent people are being killed. Quit. Get a backbone. As the drug flowed in, he whispered again, "I didn't kill her." Then silence. At 10:47 a.m., Oscar Franklin Smith was pronounced dead, the first execution in Tennessee in 5 years. No autopsy followed. His family refused, citing his Christian faith. We'll never know if he felt the excruciating pain his lawyer feared. We only know the state called it justice. Outside the prison, Judith's family thanked the justice system. "The pain never heals," her sister said. Protesters held vigils, calling execution state-sanctioned murder. And Oscar's handmade leather Bible covers, crafted in prison, became relics of a man who claimed redemption. Was Oscar Smith a monster? A victim of a broken system? Or both? The truth is buried now, with Judith, with Chad and Jason, and with the old man who ate apple pie and swore he was innocent until the lethal dose hit his veins. Subscribe to our channel to get updated daily now.